Hi everyone, we're Team Acclimatizer from Studio Angius. As evident in the name of our project Acclimatizer, one of our main research objectives is to expand the architectural discourse by deploying adaptable and flexible approach to dwelling design that can accommodate complexities brought by diverse climatic conditions and human needs. From our perspective, anticipating change as much as possible and adopting a proactive approach are most appropriate approach to mitigating habitat losses. First, we're going to talk about the climatic anomalies that we're most concerned about.
From the last 2 decades, extreme cold weather events at mid-latitudes has become more frequent and the timings of outbreaks more unpredictable. The occurrence in different regions from October to March. The main reasons for the increasing frequencies of these extreme weather events at the low and middle latitude is that the global warming is causing polar vortex to break through the jet stream and spread it to the lower and the middle latitudes. With the additions of nor'easter and other factors, polar vortex has been particularly severe for the United States. At the beginnings of this year and the end of the last year, sudden cold wave event occurs on both the east and west coastal of the US. As can be seen in the comparisons of 2 satellite images, the increasing snowpack over the 14 days period affects a large number of urban and suburban areas. Of this severe affect area, Buffalo caught our attentions. This type of cold wave events is unknown. Is not unknown in the past meteorological history, but the severities of this event and the event is becoming more and more unpredictable. Take the 2 particularly severe cold waves of 2014 and 2021. As we have found this chart, there's a drastic change in temperature over the 2-week period. The extreme rapid cooling is compounded by a large amount of snow, which had a serious effect in our building environment. Yet, when we look at the whole year, it doesn't just exist in one particular time. For 4 to 5 months of the year, certain areas of Buffalo are snow in a year-round. In some exceptional years, sudden snowfall can occur between October and February. When looking at hourly temperature data, we find that even the highest midday temperature during the winter months are too low for outdoor activities. Therefore, there's likely that in this region, people are more likely to be indoors during the winter month, while in the summer they are able to choose according to their needs.
Within this particular climatic context of the extreme cold environments, the primary objective of architecture must evolve beyond mere provision of shelter. Because currently, as we observe for Buffalo, most of the architecture are in a relatively static state. So when the snow accumulates in different depths, it has different severity, consequences of different severities. And in the most severe condition, the whole place are covered by deep snow, and not only the resources are cut off, but the whole community is in an isolated status. However, archetypes emerge within humans' resistance and utilization of cold environment all the time, and we found the igloo to be super interesting. The Inuit used snow as a construction material due to its high availability and abundance in frigid regions. And some of the igloos appear separately at ground level, but actually they are connected by semi-underground passages. So in the way, during the most extreme months, the igloo blurs the boundary of the interior and exterior space. And when the spring and summer comes, it just returns to nature with no trace. And also, we try to learn from the animal, which is the emperor penguin. So when the extreme condition appears, they are going to gather to have a behavior called huddling. So through this kind of collective behavior, they can conserve the heat and minimize the heat loss in the whole community. So learning from these two great references, we try to propose our own architectural proposal. So through a series of geographic analysis and climatic analysis, we try to give a score for our whole site. So we score our site from 0 to 100. So during the summer seasons, the restrictions are less. So our units can scatter around almost the whole place that ranges from 60 to 100. But during the most harsh season, we will try to use our assessment system to find the most habitable spots in our site, which is scoring between 80 and 100. So all of our units were moved according to this assessment system and moved to habitable places. So just to synthesize our strategy, for the units, we're going to try to expand the volume in the milder season. But for the extreme season, we are just minimizing our volume to conserve heat and save energy. And in terms of collective behavior, all of our units are going together and get group heating during the harsh season and rescatter in the milder ones. So for our proposal we mentioned before, we do a lot of prototypes to realize our idea. So we've been trying to create loads of prototypes that has bistable states of vastly different volumes. In hindsight, we categorize them into two families, which is the Caesar family and the waffle family. We have the most simplest one here to show you. And first, we're going to talk about the waffle family. It's not hard to see that it has some similar properties with the igloo. So when it's in expanded state, all of the grade on the top of the surface can serve as a harvesting system for the snow. Initially, we found like the structure has like inherent disadvantages that it can only transform from one single direction. So we try to add a rib in the middle of the two waffle, and we try to make it have a multi-directional transformation. And also, in order to have a better control of the insulated properties, we try to create variations of the density of the grade of the waffles. What's more, we try to create some double layer ones for this prototype. So when it's in the certain state, there's a column will form inside, which can accumulate snow and serve as a snow column for our prototype. Also, it creates an air cavity under the top surface, which can have the potential to create an extra interior space. To get a better insulation in larger scale, we also try to use 3D print soft material and also the silicon surface to adapt to the waffle grade. And the second prototype family we develop is the Caesar family. Compared to the waffle family, it has better capabilities to change its volume, and also it can respond to the snow load. As we know, like the snow will accumulate on the top of the architecture in real situation. So if our prototype can react to the gravity on the top, then it's worth researching. So based on the most simple ones, we develop a lot of Caesar structure that has multi-directional transformation. And also we found it has great performance on aggregation and collective interactive behavior. And what's more, with some of the Caesar structure we developed before, like apart from the overall volume change, the inner volume distribution are varied. And the third step we tried is to aggregate these two prototypes. At the first, the waffle just merely serve as a bridge to connect to see the structure, but we think it's not enough, so we try to make it become an enclosure that attach to the skeleton. But in the end, we try to develop it into a degree that wanted to generate an actual geometry for the cedar structure. So for our final unit, we just select one of the prototype we think is most promising, which is this arc-shaped one that can that 2D Caesar can actuate the 3D skeletons. But the first one we tried has a really flat surface, which is not good for our environment. So we mirror it and created like an arc shape. And the great things about this prototype is that it has a complete volume inside. So without any extra column, so just simply actuate any 2 points on the bottom, the whole structure will transform into a larger state. But as we said before, the Caesar structure is like a skeleton, so the volume inside is quite abstract. So in order to make the boundary of the volume to be clear, we simulate the traces of the movement. And according to the traces, we'll try to create a rigid surface attached to the main skeleton. And also, as we mentioned before, we create a waffle layer that can perfectly attach to the shell, rigid shell, and can transform with the main skeleton. However, some of the surfaces are still exposed to the air. So for the other side of the prototype, we use oxective patterns to create a soft enclosure to make the whole skeleton are covered by a clear boundary. And also we found out like the prototype we developed has obvious transformation on height, which is almost two times of the smaller state. So based on this, we developed 3 prototypes that can create a double layer inside for our future further research.
So based on the research we did before, the nomad is mainly composed of several layers. On the left, the Caesar structure in the center is an active transform, and in order to reduce the energy consumption, we designed the other structure layer to be passive transform, including the waffle and the subpattern, as well as the enclosure origami wall, so the unit can be driven only by the Caesar structures. And the unit has 2 stable states. The larger state in the summer, and when the winter comes, it needs to be moved and therefore compressed into a very smaller state and spend the entire extreme season in the smaller state. In addition, as we just mentioned before, when the snow on the top of our unit, the weight of the snow can activate the unit transforming. Combined with the isolation part we mentioned before, the problem that we have two problems. One is the bottom of the cell is not flat, so we designed the variable platform on the both of sides, which are used as steps to the outdoors in the summer, and also can be a shared platform in the winter to make some shareable place. The next part is our interior strategy for our deformation logic design. According to our unit, the horizontal and the vertical direction have a distance change. So we first use the strategy of 2 layers into one, and the higher layer is like a fixed space, and the lower layer is like a flexible space. It can deform. When in the summer we need some larger space, the furniture in the lower layer will pop out to form a sofa or table, and when the volume is compressed, it will become a flat surface again. In order to solve the strategy, we studied some material of TPU 3D printing and we found that it has some possibility to bend from a flat surface to a curvature. This is our plan section of our project. And regarding to the function part, the main logic is like we want to aggregation the functions in the minimal state, and the unnecessary functions like studying room or eating room can be aggregation in another part. And from the 3D view, you can see the compressions of our interior space. According to this graph, we can see the energy consumption of human in the winter is significantly higher than the summer. So we combine the minimal space. We did some research before, and we can have a property scale in our minimal space. In order to solve the energy consumption, you can see the data from this slide. The energy consumption of people in winter is very higher than in the summer. And we summarized the data and came up with like energy consumption per household in summer and winter. In order to solve the energy consumption, we mainly use the method of solar panels to generate electricity, which is generated much higher in summer and can be stored for the winter. However, because the snow can accumulate on the top of the solar panel, so we have also another strategy to generate electricity. While moving the panel at the bottom of the unit can generate electricity by the friction on the road. In the winter, the snow on the top can also generate electricity. In addition, when the temperature rises, the melting snow on the top can be used as nature water for drinking and irrigating the vegetarians, creating a self-sufficient system. And we have also found when the multiple people sharing the resource together and the average consumption is much lower than individual, which is one of the reasons why we need cluster.
So about the cluster part, this is a live photos of the buffalo, and as you can see, like the community is facing the problem of the isolation during the extreme cold weather. And so we are inspired by the Inuit because some of the igloos will appear separate at the ground level, but they are connected by the semi-underground pass, and in this way they blur the boundary between the interior and also the exterior space. And the units are divided into 3 types, each with the different responsibilities within a whole cluster. Like the navigator is smaller and can move quickly in extreme cold environment, and the supplier provides the energy and also the public space for the community. And also the nomad is a residential unit. We take the nomad and the supplier as a part of our cluster. So we want the unit to have some temporary semi-public area between the units while closely forming a community against the cold. So we categorize the morphology of the gap between the units and summarize the 5 most common geometry. So the small cluster can form a larger community, and supplier as a public space, the interior will connect and to form a larger public space. And also, we did some research about the material of this buffer zone, and we hope that the temperature and the snow could also be used as a building material, and the nature elements can be added to the construction of the whole community. And we found a potential material like the frozen fabric. The fabric is used to connect the units to each other at the specific field joints to form a buffer zone. The physical experiments have shown that the fabric will highly increase the rigidity of when it was frozen, and also the fabric can be attached directly to the scissor structure we designed before.
And in conclusion, the unit formed to compact unit during the winter and to survive for the need. And also in the milder season, the people can choose where to settle down. So as you can see in this render, the fabric can attach directly to the scissor structure and also to create a semi-outdoor space. And also the physical model have shown that that it will increase the rigidity and to combine and create a public area for the whole cluster. So the next part is about the mobility part. The most common forms of the snow transport today can be classified into two types, the tracks and the slide. So by far, the snowmobile are most efficient way to move around the snow because they mix the advantage of the tracks and the skis. And thinking about how penguin moves, we can actually pick up some interesting tricks they use because they use their things and the bricks to help them to climb up. And when they are going down, they basically turn their belly into a kind of slide. So it's also a transformation between the slides and the tracks. So we try to create a system, a pattern system, which can create the transformation between the slide and the track. And by changing the angles at which the surface blend, we can generate an adaptive surface. So when the patterns blind, it will become a track, and when it's spread out and fill the gap with the ice, it will become a smooth slide. Also, we try to 3D print some pattern tests on the fabric, also on the TPU. And we find that if we, by combining a hard base on the soft skin, the degree of the skin curvature can be precisely controlled. So finally, we design a system which can attach to at the bottom of our unit. And we have researched the behaviors of the both system in addition to the facts, and the surface will translate between a smooth slide and a raw track. When the unit slide, the distance between the scales increase, and thus lowering the center of the gravity and to keep it stable. And in the track is state the space between the gears and decrease, and also the ratios of the wheel increase, resulting in some efficient tracks. So we have, as we mentioned before, we have 3 different units of our different units. So each of the units will have the different will have different mobility patterns. So following the seasons, the unit itself will change and transformation, and also the community will shrink and migrate. In the study of the cluster movement method, we are inspired by the logic of the penguin movement. During the movement of the penguin, the penguin at the back and the set of the cluster are constantly moving towards the edge of the cluster, thus keeping the cold area of the whole cluster to become warm. So we try to simulate the way of our units move in digital simulation. So the units will become gathering together during the extreme cold weather. And also, we have some video to show the works we've done before. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Here's all of our collection of our models. As we mentioned before, we have two family, which is the Caesar family and the waffle family. For the Caesar family, it's really flexible and just actually it's each point of the whole structure, then it can achieve transformation. And the original one we use is this one. We use the 2D Caesar to actuate a 3D arc. And gradually, we developed into this, we call it arc shape. So this one, you can see we have a volume inside, a complete volume. And the next one is the waffle structure. So it can transform from a really flat surface to a large volume, every one of them. And this one is, we mentioned before, actually it has an air cavity inside, which is a double layer one. And also we can make a hole inside to serve as the snow column. And we try to aggregate this two family together. Yeah, you can show that. So if we just precisely design the geometry, the harvesting subsystem can move along with the main skeleton easily. And for this site, we use these auxetic patterns. To offer a sub-layer and enclosure for these sites. And since we have such a great transformation on the height, we develop some of the double layer ones. Which is more clear here, maybe through the big prototype. So when the prototype rises, the minimal volume protected in the middle will rise, but when in harsh winter season, we'll just go back to our minimal states. And all of our functions are protected in this shell. Okay. And this model shows the layer of our final units. So the rigid shell in the middle, but all of the other side are covered by soft system. And also these two section models show our layers. And the final one is the buffer zone one. That's how we use frozen fabric to make a buffer zone inside every unit and create a semi-public space to serve for the public function. And that's all we have today. Thank you.
Well, congratulations. I think the amount of work was very impressive. I just have two minor points from my side. One is when you were describing the geometry, I was wondering if you could find another concept instead of waffle. You were referring to waffle and the waffle family. I was just thinking of an evolution of the DRL language. That's my main interest. If maybe you could perhaps, because you didn't use it when you were here, it was mainly like in the first part of your presentation. And the other thing that I would say is that I think make it more obvious the connection between the human body and issues of permafrost and extreme cold weather in your presentation would just be those two minor points.
So I'm just going to call it and suggest that this might not be best suited for a suburban house in Buffalo. I feel like there's an aspect of this which actually is maybe better fit to like the Canadian high Arctic, for example, and a place where you're doing actually naturally nomadic kind of surveying, but in an organization which is also sort of semi-structured or clustered. So anyway, I would just maybe revisit the sort of context or site, because I think there are some compelling sites for this, but maybe Buffalo, and maybe I'm not as convinced by. There's also an aspect of the project that, whenever I see these sort of like nomadic and autonomous houses, which is essentially what you're creating, a kind of autonomous house. Think of this quote by Khalil Gibran it's like, does your house not dream, and in dreaming leave for a grove or a hilltop? I just love that image, that there can be this house that can go where its whims might take it to experience this sort of like wider world. In terms of sort of like kinematic sort of research, I think it's quite compelling. It's extremely thorough. One of the aspects which I thought was actually really interesting is that you sort of imply this connection that there's a relationship between these bistable geometric states and thermal performance. But we don't necessarily see that thermal performance. And in fact, I feel like that's an area of research which it's somewhat open. I've seen very little research actually thinking specifically about how kinematically transformative architecture can have distinct kinds of thermal regimes. And so, I'm almost imagining these kinds of animations, but with some thermal simulations or something like this to sort of make your compelling argument that you need these different kinds of behaviors at different moments. And I think one other thing that could be useful to you is that these kinds of, almost material level approaches to geometry have been explored by a lot of material scientists recently. There's a woman, Joanna Eisenberg, who's done a lot of work actually on bio-inspired microstructures for materials that in some cases can have those kinds of distinct thermal performances. So, as much as an architect, I'm sort of like drawn to the sort of like large scale of the kind of geometry you've developed here. I think there is an opportunity to think about the microstructures that might complement or enhance or amplify the kinds of things that you're trying to take on. And I'm also kind of like really compelled by these bio-inspired tire treads. I think that's something else that I haven't seen so much of. But congratulations, it's quite compelling work.
First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. There are a couple of questions that maybe came to me while listening to your presentation. And the first one is about the two elements that you're working with, snow and water. There is, in your presentation, some voids when it comes to tell us, yes, snow will be collected, but essentially, at the time of the melting point, how is this might collaborate to the changes of shape of your own spaces? There is always throughout your presentation a point in which you say, okay, maybe now it's going to come to a conclusion about, for example, the other item, open and close. Most of your models here are showing us how we decrease and increase the shape of your modules, but it's a little bit a miss. How are you opening and closing the actual environment of the space itself? So where I really appreciate the effort of looking at this, stratification of different performances of surfaces, of structure, and so on, that I think it's quite interesting. At the same time, I feel like you lost a little bit the purpose of itself of your inhabitable space when it comes to really assess what the snow will do to the structure and because of the weight and so on, and what would do at the time of the melting. How can you link somehow the two prime, let's say, elements, natural elements of water and snow, together with your opening and closing of the system itself? And one other point that I think could have been explored a little bit better. At one point, you tell us that you have 3 types of units, that they are actually doing 3 different separate performance and are used in a different way. And in a way, you would expect that the three modules would have some sort of quite different organization of maybe the strata or maybe the way they expand and contract. Whereas they feel just in a way a scaling up and down of the same system more than an adaptation to some sort of internal organization of the spaces.
Maybe we can answer the second question first. Actually, we have developed 3 types of units in the prototype phases. We can show you the diagram. Actually, but this one is a residential one, which has a rigid core, which is perfectly protected in the middle. But we actually have another one. So when the heights are going to decrease, our 2 semi-public platform will pop out. So that one can serve as a connection for the other units. And third one, which is the minimal one for the searching the habitable spots. That one is, yeah. So this one, as you can see, when the heights are decreased, there are 2 platforms stretched out to serve as to connect to the other units. And this is the one we prepare for the residential one. And also for your first question, because most of our prototypes are actuated by snow load, which is gravity. So when the snow is going to melt in the spring and summer, the gravity will disappear. So the whole structure can after releasing the gravity on the top, and our units will come back to its maximum state. So that's our proposal. Yeah.
So I think congratulations to the work. It's quite rich and has a lot of very strong ideas, I think. Conceptually it's very strong and a lot of beautiful studies with respect to various patterns, the waffling, the ossetic patterns, the tessellations. I love the idea of integrating the snow, the penguin, the movement, et cetera, et cetera. So I had to say that I respect it a lot. I do think that Viviana put her finger on some kind of issue, which I think also I worry about. So the idea of envelope and enclosure, and there's some real challenges you need to live up to. And what is actually beautiful, again, the ambition to make it translucent. So you have the snow and you still get light through this. Some of these renderings are suggestive. But I feel that generates a lot of problems. How is the envelope? It reacts, is it a shingling? How does this live with the waffle? The waffle isn't an envelope, right? Or is the actual, or you go radical and say the snow is actually becoming the envelope, and I'm just having the snow from the inside, but what does it do in the summer? So there's a lot of open. But I think what is, I was earlier in the last project I was criticizing some kind of the elegance of this net. And I think there is something where I think with some very, very beautiful and elegant studies, but when the systems comes together, it doesn't come together. And I think renderings like in the end, or renderings like here, the product isn't giving confidence, and it just has so many open ends. And partly of this, I guess, is the methodology of working through models, and then the digital is just modeling the model. And I think that shows up. It also means, yes, you've been studying a lot of issues, but since it's this kind of capsule, the inside and the inside out, I want to see that kind of snow dome, but also what are my windows and entrance points. So these are unfortunately real lacks, and I feel that in the distance, when they're moving, they're quite beautiful, when they're huddled down and the huddling together. But if I look at some of these artifacts, in particular back there, it's really unresolved. and I see it instantly. So it is all, but what we need is full technical resolution and then formal resolution also, because there's a series of formal issues of integrating these systems. So I think in this sense, it's unfortunately, however beautiful in the studies and ideas, incomplete on that level, unfortunately. And that shows up, you know, we are aesthetic creatures, and actually we are intuitive, all audiences will get this quite instantly, that you actually can publish the renderings at this point of the final artifact.
Thank you very much. It was, I think it does open a number of, or potentially a number of very interesting ideas and actually issues. But I think I have just 2 points, questions, which concern with language and scale. We talk, I mean, I think the idea of a climatic responsive primitive hut, it's not something new, right? Is there any primitive hut which is not climatically responsive, right? So, but I do understand that you try to more to develop a prototypical microstructures, right? For possible, for different ways of inhabitation. So it's not, perhaps to use the term house here, it's misleading, right? It's not houses, they're not individual houses. They are more kind of structures which can then accommodate different groups of people, different numbers of people. And I think it would be very interesting to incorporate that factor in your explorations. And the other is the issue, which brings me to the question of scale, because as we also discussed in the previous, with the previous project, there are different scales of deployment, right? And you talk about the interactive enclosure, but also the kind of responsive or interactive interior. And I was quite intrigued or fascinated by these 2 different expressions, because so it's to find what we interact with, because it's not just the snow, right? And once perhaps you unpack a little bit what you mean, or you explore what you mean by responsive interior or interactive interior, because there where inhabitation comes in, and other factors, again, apart from the weight of the snow, right? Perhaps that could bring in the complexity, which you seem to be suggesting, but it's not yet there.
Okay, I'll say thank you. Okay, so I just high level, I thought it was really refreshing to see snow and ice when we keep talking about climate change. So in a way, it was quite nice to kind of be pulled into a different physical space and, use the word context. So I thought it was really nice, actually, and quite brave when we keep talking about global warming. The language around response, react, adapt comes up over and over again throughout your presentation, and this constant movement. And I do think it would be interesting to get a sense of stasis and where you see the balance of that in terms of, when there is a moment for these spaces to exist, what is done with them? What is the point of them? Whether it's a hut or whatever, how does the design engage with the interiors or the exterior when things are just still in that moment? And that's something that I think could have been shown or emphasized a little bit more. The idea of connecting to migration and connecting to the biosphere, of course, has been there throughout history, but it's also very powerful. I don't think we talk about it enough. If you think about if and how humans might survive outside of cities, there are actually migrant communities are part of the biosphere officially. So when you look at, like the Himalayas, for example, you have goat herding communities that move with the seasons. They're actually considered to be part of the environment, alongside, other species. So I think that in itself is very powerful, but how you could mark this out as, why and how, I think could take it to another level. And then finally, on the actual design and the models, for me, they're very insect-like. I don't know if that was, did you talk about that? I just feel like I'm seeing lots of bugs everywhere. And I don't know if you had an inspiration or that just is how they ended up being. But I think that's really cool. And I feel like there could be something there if you wanted to talk about it or explain it as to how you got the design inspiration or the mechanics of it. And for me, it looks like wings opening and closing. And I think that's also very cool. So thank you, guys.
Because apart from the snow, we think like the elements that we concern most is the temperature variations. Because the reason that why we didn't choose like Antarctic or Greenland, like the places that are cold all the year, the reason that we chose a moderate latitude one is like so the temperature variation between summer and winter are quite huge, like almost like 30 degrees Celsius. So, and we believe that like the smaller volume are easier to conserve heat. And also, as we mentioned before, like during winter, it's easier to consume energy and resources. So we want to minimize the volume in these aspects. So these are the other things that support our research. So, but maybe because we talk too much about the snow itself, so we should emphasize more about the temperature variation, and also is another principle that supports all of our research. Yeah, and also for the geometry you mentioned before. So when it comes to the minimal volume, we expect the waffle structure to cover on the sides to create an insulation layer, because it will let the snow to accumulate in the grate. So it will just like cover around it as a protective gesture. Yeah, so that's part of the aspect that trigger our design. Yeah.
I just wanted to return to a footnote, one of Patrick's comments around how these elements begin to fit together as a sort of assemblage, because in particular, and I think the penguins are a very evocative sort of reference. One of the things that's key about penguins is that as they begin to huddle, they have some very interesting behaviors. I mean, first of all, they lay themselves actually on the adjacent ones in the huddle. So it's not as if they're only in close proximity. They actually begin to conform their shape to their neighbors. And so one of the things that I think is very interesting about a project like this is right now you have geometries which are, again, very autonomous. They're individual. They connect maybe at the edges, but there's an opportunity to say, okay, well, if we were to think about these geometries as not just individual, but actually behaving in a much more complete sort of network, how do they begin to conform each other to their neighbors? How do they begin to sort of overlap? How do they begin to sort of create much higher levels of sort of like shared surfaces? How do they compact each other? Because that also amplifies the possibility for thermal performance, which is ultimately what you're after. And it opens up a very interesting sort of like avenue for geometric investigation, which goes, I think, somewhat beyond the already sort of like rich investigations at the individual module level. Yeah, it becomes this sort of like packing question, but not only packing, it's like, you can imagine these things actually sort of like transforming slightly in order to accommodate their neighbors. It becomes a sort of like, it's like a squishy packing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, like all these comments are super important. I mean, these are like pointing on issues that we discussed during the year. I think it was very difficult to address the aspect of the extreme weather together with, also extreme kinetics somehow in a way, which I think was the prompt and the initial kind of input coming from the brief, which in a way, I like just to kind of pick up on a comment that we heard yesterday. It leads us to absurd precision somehow, in a way, which I like as a definition. In a way, I think, to me, what is important about your project, first of all, like, I really need to commend you for the amount of prototypes and the endless kind of attitude towards researching new methods, new kind of geometries, new ways of interfacing and correlating. different types of kinetic systems, and at the same time trying to address also the complexity of not only kind of shape shifting as a sort of geometrical condition, but also like looking at the programmatic fluctuations that can be triggered together with seasonal changes, the extreme event on the weather pattern. And I think in a way this is to me personally very, very important, the fact that we recognize that practically the extreme is not anymore an anomaly, but is actually the norm. And to to kind of force ourselves to really work on projects that in a way have to face these kind of criticalities is quite important. But also like working on let's say a balance in between active and passive let's say behavior is also important, because like designing a house for these type of extreme events, it means that you are not able to design it for the rest of the year in a way. So how do you design something that requires to, is asked to respond to something so extreme? No, that's the question. Meaning that you cannot design it properly if you don't think about how this let's say design object responds to it. And I think the idea of working with mobility and extreme transformation comes from that. Saying that, I think I agree on the fact that there are some elements that in a way you could have refined and also like coordinating aesthetically certain aspects. But in general, to me, what I love about the project is the fact that your material palette starts to incorporate elements from nature, which I think is something to not take for granted, like ice, snow, become part of the design. And that is, I think, super strong. And the way, like, I know that waffle doesn't sound like a good term, but in a way, like a dynamic waffle, as you designed it, is actually an interesting device that, in a way, the way you kind of explored it, demonstrated that can actually become an interesting kind of thermal insulation device, in a way. You had also other physical models that perhaps you didn't show. But in general, I have to say, really, personally, I love your project. I know that it's not completed, but in a way, it opens up to many questions that, in a way, I personally think they are useful to put on the table and generate also like comments that perhaps are not always super kind of, let's say, positive, but they are positive in a way that they generate the thinking about around this issue, which perhaps is relevant.
Thanks, guys. No, it's okay. Love is a dangerous subject, so we're going to leave it there. I think you guys should be commended for a lot of the work that you guys have put on the table. I do think that there is a moment in time when you should take stock of where you've gotten, and I think you should try to do a lot more with less. I think the issues of the environment and how it participates somehow is sometimes outside of the architecture. We still speak about a mechanical paradigm for the kinematics, but what you're suggesting, I think, is something much more symbiotic with the environment, which I think is important. And it's kind of like if you relook at the history of like, Rainer Banham's architecture of the well-tempered environment, these kind of ideas about what architecture could be, I mean, that was talked about in a certain kind of paradigm. And I think if you speak about it today with what you're looking at, I think you could start to really see it almost like a very light touch in terms of the architecture, like Isler, and a very, very important dependence on the environment and how you can slightly utilize those phase-changing qualities to it. Like all the actuation, when we talk about the difference between snow and ice and expansion, contraction, if you're a polar bear, your body heat is basically melting the inside of things. Here we're talking about an architecture that's always on the inside, but you could imagine these things burrowing inside and sort of creating different kinds of ways of dealing with things. A log cabin is also an extreme piece of architecture. So I think what you're speaking about here is much more than just the performative. We talked about a little bit about the poetics before. I think there are qualities there that you guys should speak to a little bit more. And I still think that this soft, deformable system, when it's using ice and all of these things, when this is really weak form, using the environment, it rigidifies, becomes something that becomes much more form-driven. Can become more formless in different environments. Those kind of radical transformations are a bit more complex than these kind of kinesthetic joint conditions and pin conditions. I think you guys have done magic when it comes to like maximizing Hoberman-esque architecture, but I think that it's also a little bit of a trap, meaning that so much effort has gone into iterating certain aspects of this. You definitely should be commended for that, but some of the problems are just inherent in that approach to space making. And I think you have a lot of richness on the table, so I see it as a design research project that is first and foremost on the table, and this is a form of application, but I think there's a lot more possibilities to it. The treads that everybody always likes, that could be the skin of the building. It doesn't necessarily have to be located as the soul of the building. And I think all of those kind of aspects are at play. So I think you guys did a great job, and I think we can conclude this presentation and one more to go before lunch. Thank you guys so much.